Apache whispered, "Give me a child now," and the rancher almost stopped breathing. The sun had barely risen over the wide, open plains, painting the sky with soft strokes of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of fresh grass and the faint scent of earth after a long night. On this quiet ranch, life moved slowly, almost rhythmically. John Matthews, a man in his late 40s, stood near the barn, leaning against the worn wooden fence. His hands were rough and calloused from decades of work, but his eyes held a calm gentleness. Every morning he woke before the sun, as he had done for years, to care for the cattle, check the fences, and make sure the ranch ran smoothly. Life had never been easy, but John found a certain peace in routine. He had inherited this ranch from his father, who had taught him everything about the land, the animals, and the discipline it required. It was not just work, it was a way of life, a connection to generations that had lived and struggled in the same space. John loved it, even though the days were long and the work sometimes exhausting. He knew every corner of the property, every hidden path, and every sound the animals made. The land spoke to him in its own quiet way, and he had learned to listen. John's wife, Mary, was already awake, moving quietly in the small farmhouse kitchen. She hummed softly as she prepared breakfast, the aroma of coffee and toasted bread filling the air. Their teenage daughter, Emily, still half asleep, sat at the wooden table, rubbing her eyes and yawning. She was growing fast, her laughter and curiosity bringing life to the quiet mornings. The family had a close bond, formed not just by love but also by the shared responsibilities of ranch life. Emily often helped with small chores, feeding the chickens or gathering eggs, while Mary kept the household in order, ensuring that the family stayed healthy and supported. Despite the busy mornings, there was always a moment of stillness that John cherished. Standing by the fence, watching the sun rise and feeling the cool breeze on his face, he felt connected to something larger than himself. The land had a rhythm, a heartbeat that matched his own. It was a feeling that words could not fully describe, but one that filled him with a sense of belonging and purpose. On this particular morning, as John walked toward the barn to check on the cattle, he noticed something unusual. A figure stood near the edge of the pasture, still and silent. At first, he thought it might be a neighbor or someone passing by, but as he got closer, he realized that it was a man he had never seen before. The stranger's presence was calm but carried an intensity that made John pause. There was something about him, his posture, the way he observed the land, that felt both foreign and familiar, as if he belonged to the very soil beneath their feet. The man was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to reflect a deep wisdom. His skin was weathered by the sun, and his movements were slow, deliberate, and confident. He did not speak immediately. He simply watched the cattle and the land with a quiet attentiveness. John's first instinct was caution. He had lived his life surrounded by people, but strangers rarely appeared on the ranch without reason. Yet, there was no hostility in this man's gaze, only a calm presence that intrigued John. Over the next few days, the stranger returned, always at the same time, always moving silently among the animals. He helped with the work without needing instruction, repairing fences with skill and feeding the cattle with care. John watched from a distance, trying to understand who this man was and why he had come. There was an air of mystery surrounding him, a sense that he carried knowledge and experiences far beyond what John had ever known. Mary and Emily noticed the stranger too, though they were more cautious than John. Emily whispered questions to her mother, curious about the man who seemed to appear out of nowhere, while Mary reminded her daughter to stay careful and respectful. John, however, felt a strange sense of trust forming. Perhaps it was the way the man worked with the animals, or the silent respect he showed to the land. There was something in his presence that made John feel both challenged and inspired, as if a new chapter of life was quietly unfolding before him. Life on the ranch continued, but there was a subtle change in the air. The animals moved differently, calmer yet more alert, as if sensing something beyond the usual rhythms of daily life. The wind carried whispers of distant mountains and forgotten stories, and John found himself thinking about the past, his father's lessons, and the connection between people and the land. The stranger, whom they had come to call Apache, seemed to move in harmony with these rhythms, always appearing when needed and disappearing without explanation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, John walked toward the barn to finish the last chores. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, and the clouds rolled in slowly, dark and thick. Apache was already there, standing near the horses, his eyes focused on the animals as if he could see beyond the physical world. John approached quietly, unsure whether to speak or simply observe. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was filled with the unspoken understanding that sometimes words were unnecessary. Finally, Apache spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight that made John stop in his tracks. He did not reveal much, only sharing small observations about the land and the animals, yet every word seemed to hold meaning far deeper than their surface. John listened, absorbing the wisdom without fully understanding it. There was an undeniable sense that this stranger had come for a reason, that his presence was not accidental but purposeful. As the evening progressed, the family gathered inside the farmhouse. Mary served a simple meal, and Emily chatted about her day at school, but John's thoughts remained with Apache and the strange, silent connection he had begun to feel. He realized that life on the ranch was about more than work. It was about understanding, patience, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. The stranger's presence had awakened something within him, a curiosity and awareness that had lain dormant for years. That night, as John lay in bed listening to the wind rustle the trees outside, he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The quiet ranch, once so familiar, now seemed alive with possibilities. There was a story unfolding, one that had begun with the simple act of a stranger appearing on the land, and John knew that his life, and the lives of his family, were about to change in ways they could not yet imagine. The first part of the story ends with a lingering sense of mystery. The ranch remains a place of hard work and simple pleasures, but beneath the surface, something new and unexpected has begun. The stranger, Apache, has entered their lives quietly but unmistakably, and the Matthews family, especially John, feels the stirrings of a journey that will test their courage, challenge their understanding, and ultimately lead them to discoveries about themselves, each other, and the land they call home. The days following Apache's arrival passed in a mix of routine and quiet unease. John Matthews continued his work on the ranch, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and ensuring the farm ran smoothly. Yet there was a subtle difference in the air, something John could not explain. The land, which he had known so well for decades, seemed to breathe differently. The wind carried whispers he could almost hear, the birds sang in unusual patterns, and even the cattle behaved strangely, moving with a sense of alertness and awareness that made John pause. Apache moved among the animals with ease, guiding them gently, sometimes whispering words John could not understand. He worked silently, his movements deliberate and calm, yet every gesture seemed to hold purpose. John watched him carefully, trying to understand the man who had appeared so suddenly in their lives. There was no sign of hostility, but there was something in Apache's presence that commanded respect. John felt both drawn to him and cautious, unsure what role this stranger would play in their lives. Mary, always protective of the family, noticed Apache's quiet influence on their home. She watched as Emily became more curious and attentive to the land, asking questions about the animals, the soil, and the way Apache moved among them. Emily was fascinated by the stranger, asking her mother why he seemed so different. Mary, though wary, encouraged her daughter to be polite and observant, sensing that Apache's presence was teaching lessons that went beyond ordinary understanding. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high in the sky and the heat shimmered over the dry plains, a small incident made John pause. A calf had wandered toward the edge of the pasture, near a steep drop that could have caused serious injury. Apache appeared almost as if by instinct, moving swiftly yet calmly, guiding the calf back to safety. John had been moments away from calling out a warning, but the stranger's action had prevented any danger. There was no pride or showmanship in his movements, only quiet skill and knowledge. John felt a mix of relief and curiosity, realizing that Apache's presence on the ranch was more than coincidence. It was almost as if he belonged there, as though the land itself had invited him. That evening, after the work was done and the family sat down to dinner, John tried to speak with Apache, asking him about his past and his reasons for coming to the ranch. Apache smiled faintly but did not answer directly. Instead, he spoke in small stories, tales of rivers, mountains, and the animals that roamed freely long before fences and ranches existed. He spoke of balance, respect, and understanding, concepts John had heard in fragments from his father but never fully grasped. There was a rhythm to Apache's words, a slow unfolding of wisdom that made John feel both humbled and intrigued. Days turned into a week, and the Matthews family grew used to the stranger's presence, though the sense of mystery never faded. Apache seemed to appear when needed and vanish when not, always observing, always learning, and always guiding. John noticed a change in himself too. Tasks that once felt monotonous now held deeper meaning. He found himself thinking not just about the work, but about the land, the animals, and the connections between them. He noticed subtle signs in the sky, the movement of the cattle, and the way the earth smelled after rain. It was as though Apache had opened a window to a world John had only glimpsed in dreams and memories. But not all moments were calm. Strange events began to unfold on the ranch, small yet unsettling. Tools John had left in the barn were moved without explanation. The animals would gather in unusual formations as if waiting for something, and sometimes at night, faint sounds echoed across the fields. The family felt it too, an unspoken tension, a feeling that something was watching, guiding, or testing them. Emily whispered to her mother one night about a shadow she had seen near the barn, but when they went to investigate, nothing was there. Mary tried to reassure her daughter, attributing it to imagination or tiredness, but even she could not fully shake the unease. John himself felt a growing sense of responsibility. He was no longer just caring for the ranch as a place of work. He was beginning to understand it as a living entity, full of secrets, rhythms, and lessons. Apache's presence was not only a mystery but also a challenge. John realized that the ranch was teaching him patience, observation, and humility. It was asking him to notice details, to respect the balance of nature, and to understand that life was more than the immediate work and routine. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and red, John found himself standing by the fence, watching Apache move among the cattle. There was something almost magical in the way the stranger interacted with the animals, each movement careful, each word gentle. John felt a wave of emotions, admiration, curiosity, and a subtle fear of the unknown. He wondered who Apache really was and why he had chosen their ranch of all places. But deep down, John felt a growing trust, a belief that this stranger had come to teach, not to harm. The turning point of this part came when an unusual event occurred during a late evening check on the cattle. A sudden storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds gathering quickly and the wind whipping across the plains. The animals became restless, sensing the change in the weather. John struggled to guide them to safety, but the storm moved faster than expected. Lightning flashed across the sky, striking near the barn, and the animals scattered in panic. Fear gripped John as he ran toward them, but Apache moved calmly among the chaos. He called softly to the animals, guiding them back, his voice carrying a strange authority that calmed even the most frightened creatures. John realized that Apache's presence was not just helpful, it was essential. The storm passed, leaving the ranch unharmed, but the tension remained. That night, as the family sat together in the dimly lit farmhouse, they discussed the storm and the day's events. Emily, wide-eyed, asked about Apache and how he had managed to calm the animals. John tried to explain that some people had a special connection to the land and its creatures, though he himself could not fully understand it. Mary, quietly observing, realized that this was more than just a stranger visiting. They were witnessing a rare presence, someone whose knowledge and skill transcended ordinary life. The days continued, filled with both work and the subtle mysteries that Apache brought with him. John noticed a shift in his own thoughts, a deeper awareness of the ranch and its hidden rhythms. He began to keep track of small signs, the way the wind moved, the patterns of the clouds, and the unusual behavior of the animals. Each detail seemed connected, part of a larger story that he was only beginning to understand. Apache never forced lessons or explanations. Instead, he allowed John and his family to observe, to question, and to learn at their own pace. As the week drew to a close, a quiet tension lingered over the ranch. The family felt the presence of something larger than themselves, something that demanded respect and attention. They could not explain it fully, but the changes in the land, the animals, and even themselves were undeniable. John realized that Apache's visit was not random. There was a purpose, a lesson, and perhaps a challenge waiting for them, though what it might be remained hidden for now. The second part of the story ends with a mixture of wonder and unease. The Matthews family had begun to accept Apache's presence, but the sense of mystery and the unexplained events left them on edge. Life on the ranch was no longer ordinary. It was a journey into the unknown, a story of trust, observation, and connection with the land and the unseen forces that guided it. The storm, the subtle signs, and Apache's quiet guidance had shown them that their lives were intertwined with something much larger, and that their understanding of the world was about to be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. The weeks passed, and the ranch settled into a new rhythm, one that included the presence of Apache. John Matthews had grown more accustomed to the stranger, though he still felt a constant sense of curiosity and caution. Each day brought small lessons, subtle signs in the land, and moments of quiet reflection. The animals seemed calmer around Apache, almost as if they recognized a guardian in him, someone who understood their fears, their instincts, and their needs better than anyone else. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent behind the distant hills, John was repairing a fence along the northern pasture. The wind carried the scent of fresh earth and dry grass, and the soft calls of cattle echoed across the plains. Apache appeared silently, as he often did, standing a few feet away. John noticed the intensity in the man's eyes that he had seen only once or twice before. There was a seriousness that made John's stomach tighten, a sense that something important was about to happen. Without preamble, Apache spoke, his voice calm yet commanding, carrying a weight that made John pause mid-task. "Give me a child now," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. John froze, his hands gripping the wooden post as if he might be rooted to the spot. He stared at Apache, his mind racing. The statement made no sense. What could this man mean? Did he expect a child from the family? How could he even ask such a thing? Fear and confusion flooded John's thoughts, and for the first time since meeting Apache, he felt a moment of real panic. The wind whistled through the fence posts, and the cattle in the pasture shifted nervously. John swallowed hard, trying to find words, but none came. Apache's eyes, dark and steady, seemed to look through him, as if seeing his thoughts, his fears, and his hesitation. There was no anger, no threat in his tone, only an urgent insistence that demanded attention. John's mind struggled to understand the meaning behind the words. Was this a literal demand, or was there a deeper meaning, one that his practical mind could not yet grasp? Taking a deep breath, John stepped closer, keeping his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "Apache, I don't understand. What do you mean?" he asked. Apache did not answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for John to sit on a nearby fallen log, the silence stretching between them. The rustling of leaves and distant calls of the cattle were the only sounds. Finally, Apache spoke, slowly, carefully, as if choosing each word with precision. "The child I speak of is not what you think," he said. "It is not flesh and blood. It is hope. It is life that must be nurtured, protected, and carried forward. It is the continuation of what is right and just, the balance between what you know and what you do not. You have been entrusted with the land, with the animals, and with the family. The child is the life that grows in understanding, in care, and in respect. You must give it now within your heart and your actions." John's mind reeled. The fear began to ease slightly, replaced by confusion and a dawning realization. He looked at Apache, searching for reassurance, and saw only calm wisdom in his eyes. The stranger's words, though cryptic, carried a truth that resonated deep within John. He realized that the child Apache spoke of was symbolic, representing responsibility, awareness, and the careful nurturing of life on the ranch. It was a call to recognize the importance of his role, not just as a rancher, but as a guardian of life, family, and the land itself. That night, John could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Apache's words over and over in his mind. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old wood and the soft breaths of his wife and daughter. Mary, noticing his restlessness, asked if he was all right, and John explained as best he could the conversation he had with Apache. Mary listened carefully, her brow furrowed, sensing the depth of the moment. She did not fully understand, but she felt the importance of what had been said. Emily, curious and wide-eyed, asked questions too, and John tried to answer, choosing his words carefully to convey the meaning without fear or confusion. The next few days were different. John noticed a shift in his own thoughts and actions. He observed the cattle more closely, noting their movements, their needs, and their moods. He tended to the land with renewed care, repairing fences with greater attention, ensuring that water was always clean and that the fields were prepared for the coming season. He spoke to Emily and Mary about patience, observation, and the importance of understanding the world around them. In these small ways, John began to give the child, to nurture hope, awareness, and responsibility in the life he led every day. Apache, quietly observing, continued to guide without words. He appeared when needed, helping with the work, sharing stories that carried lessons about balance, respect, and life itself. John began to see the stranger not as an outsider, but as a teacher, a reminder of truths that had always existed but were easily overlooked in the routine of daily life. The mysterious request that had once filled him with fear now became a source of reflection, guiding him to deeper understanding. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned brilliant shades of gold and purple, Apache and John walked together along the ridge of the pasture. The wind carried the scent of earth and grass, and the distant mountains looked like shadows against the horizon. Apache spoke of the land, of the animals, and of the delicate balance between human life and nature. He told stories of ancestors who had lived with respect for the land, teaching lessons without force but through observation, patience, and care. John listened intently, feeling the weight and truth in every word. The turning point came when Apache asked John to perform a simple act of care for the animals, one that seemed ordinary but held symbolic importance. He guided John to the youngest calf, instructing him to feed and nurture it with patience and understanding. "This calf," Apache said, "is life. How you care for it reflects how you care for all life. Give it your attention, your respect, and your patience. In this way, you give the child." John followed the instructions carefully, realizing that every gentle touch, every thoughtful action was a lesson in responsibility and love. He understood now that the child was not a person but a living principle, a way of being that nurtured life, family, and the land. Over the following days, John noticed changes in himself and in his family. Emily became more observant, asking questions about the animals and the land, learning to see the world through careful eyes. Mary found a new appreciation for the small miracles of daily life, the growth of plants, the health of the animals, and the rhythm of the seasons. John felt a deeper connection to the ranch, a realization that his life was intertwined with every living thing around him. The mysterious words of Apache had sparked a transformation, guiding them all toward understanding, care, and hope. Yet, the sense of mystery remained. Apache never explained more than he needed to, allowing the family to discover the lessons themselves. His presence was quiet but powerful, like the wind or the earth itself, always there, shaping, guiding, and teaching without forcing. John often found himself reflecting on the moment when Apache first whispered those words, the fear and confusion he had felt, and the profound understanding that had followed. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons arrive in the most unexpected forms, challenging us to grow and see beyond the obvious. As Part 3 ends, the ranch is alive with subtle energy. The family has begun to understand the depth of Apache's request, and John has started to embrace the symbolic child in his actions, thoughts, and care for the land and family. The story now moves into a space where the balance between fear, curiosity, and understanding sets the stage for growth, reflection, and the challenges that lie ahead. The ranch, once familiar and predictable, has become a place of learning, discovery, and connection, a living classroom for life's most important lessons. The days on the ranch grew longer and busier, yet quieter in a way that carried meaning. John Matthews found himself waking earlier than usual, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Each morning, he walked through the fields with a deeper awareness, noticing the subtle movements of the animals, the texture of the soil, and the patterns in the clouds that seemed to guide his day. The words Apache had whispered weeks before, "Give me a child now," had become a part of him, not as a question of fear but as a call to care, responsibility, and understanding. John's hands, once rough and mechanical from years of labor, now moved with deliberate thoughtfulness. Feeding the cattle, mending fences, and preparing the fields were no longer tasks completed out of routine. Each action carried a purpose, a sense that life depended not only on survival but on attention, compassion, and patience. The symbolic child Apache spoke of had taken root in John's mind. It was not a child of flesh and blood, but a representation of hope, balance, and the careful nurturing of everything around him. Mary watched this transformation quietly, noting how John's eyes lingered on the small details. The way he handled the animals, the care he took in his work, and the patience he showed toward Emily were all signs of the lesson taking hold. She, too, began to reflect on her role within the family. Life had always been busy and practical, but now she felt a shift, a deeper awareness that her thoughts, words, and actions contributed to the harmony of their home. Emily, sensing her parents' changed demeanor, began to act differently too. She approached the animals with gentleness, helped in the fields with patience, and even spoke to her mother and father about the patterns she noticed in the land and sky. Apache remained a quiet presence throughout. He never forced explanations or guidance, but appeared at the right moments, offering small observations or gentle corrections. One afternoon, As John struggled with a stubborn fence post that refused to stay in place, Apache approached silently. Without a word, he demonstrated a method of planting and securing it, showing not only efficiency but respect for the land. John watched carefully, realizing that every action, no matter how small, was an expression of care and understanding. He mirrored Apache's movements, feeling a growing connection to both the work and the wisdom behind it. Despite these moments of calm, challenges arose that tested John's patience and understanding. A sudden illness struck one of the older cows, leaving it weak and unable to feed. John felt a surge of worry and frustration, unsure how to help. He tried different methods, relying on his years of experience, but nothing seemed to work. Apache appeared quietly, placing a hand on John's shoulder. His voice was calm, steady, and deliberate. "Care for her as you would care for the child," he said. "Notice her needs, be patient, and act with understanding, not force." John spent hours with the cow, observing her carefully, adjusting her food, and speaking softly to her. He began to see the importance of attention, patience, and empathy. Gradually, the cow's strength returned, and John felt a quiet pride and relief, knowing that his careful actions had made a difference. The lesson was clear. Life, whether human or animal, thrived when met with awareness, patience, and respect. This was the essence of the symbolic child Apache had asked him to give. The family faced another challenge when a storm approached without warning. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the fences and shaking the trees. The animals became restless, frightened by the sudden change in the weather. John and Emily worked together to secure the barns and guide the cattle to safety, while Mary prepared the farmhouse for the worst. Apache moved among the animals as he always had, calm and focused, directing them with a quiet authority that calmed even the most panicked creatures. After the storm passed, the ranch lay in a fragile calm. Fallen branches littered the fields, and some of the fences were damaged, but the family was safe. John looked at Apache, gratitude and understanding in his eyes. The storm had tested not only their skills, but their patience, teamwork, and ability to care for life in all its forms. It was a reminder that challenges, no matter how difficult, were opportunities to give the child hope, responsibility, and nurturing care, through action and thoughtfulness. As the days continued, John began to reflect on his past life and the choices he had made. He thought about his father and the lessons he had been taught as a boy, many of which he had forgotten in the rush of adult responsibilities. He considered his own actions, the moments he had acted out of impatience or fear, and realized how much growth he had undergone since Apache's arrival. The symbolic child was no longer an abstract idea. It was a living practice, a guide to daily life, teaching him to act with mindfulness, compassion, and respect. Emily also grew under this guidance. She began noticing patterns in the animals' behavior, the cycles of the land, and the signs of approaching weather. Her curiosity turned into understanding, and her awareness of the world around her deepened. Mary, observing both her husband and daughter, felt a sense of connection she had not realized before. The family, once functioning mainly through routine and responsibility, now lived with deeper intention and awareness. They had learned to observe, reflect, and act with care. One day, John faced a difficult choice. A neighboring rancher asked him to sell some of his best cattle for a quick profit. The offer was tempting, enough to ease financial concerns and provide immediate relief. Yet John hesitated. He thought of Apache's lessons, the symbolic child, and the responsibility he had toward the animals, the land, and the balance of life. After much reflection, he declined the offer, choosing instead to care for his herd, ensuring they were healthy and well treated. It was a hard choice, requiring patience and restraint, but John felt a deep satisfaction, knowing he had acted in alignment with the principles Apache had shared. Apache observed all of this silently. He offered no praise, only a subtle nod or a faint smile, as if to acknowledge that John had understood the lesson. The stranger's presence had guided them, but the growth had come from within, from observation, reflection, and the courage to act rightly even when it was difficult. John realized that life's lessons often required patience, humility, and trust in the process rather than immediate results. One evening, John found himself walking alone across the pasture, the sun dipping low and painting the horizon with golden light. He stopped near a small grove of trees, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves. His thoughts drifted to Apache, to the symbolic child, and to the growth that had occurred in the past weeks. He realized that the hardest lessons were not about physical labor or skill, but about understanding, awareness, and the courage to act in alignment with one's values. The ranch, the animals, and his family had all become teachers, each moment offering guidance and insight if he was willing to notice. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, John spoke to Mary and Emily about what he had learned. He explained that caring for life required patience, thoughtfulness, and understanding, that sometimes the greatest lessons came from observation rather than instruction, and that the smallest actions often carried the most significance. Mary and Emily listened intently, feeling the depth of the moment and the quiet transformation that had taken place in their lives. They realized that the symbolic child Apache had asked for was alive in each of them, nurtured through care, attention, and respect for life. The days that followed continued with challenges and lessons. A new calf was born, and John, Mary, and Emily worked together to care for it, each action deliberate, thoughtful, and full of awareness. A section of the fence broke, and instead of rushing, John carefully planned repairs, involving Emily in the work so she could learn responsibility and observation. Apache, quietly guiding and observing, never forced them but allowed the family to discover the lessons themselves, reinforcing growth through experience rather than words. By the end of Part 4, the transformation in the Matthews family was clear. John had embraced the responsibility Apache had asked him to take on, caring for the symbolic child through every action, thought, and choice. The family had grown in understanding, awareness, and patience, realizing that life's greatest lessons were not about wealth or status, but about attention, care, and respect for the world around them. Apache's presence remained a quiet, guiding force, his wisdom embedded in the family's actions and hearts. The ranch, once a place of routine work and simple survival, had become a living classroom, teaching lessons of responsibility, awareness, and the courage to act rightly. John understood that the symbolic child was not a single act but a continuous practice, a way of life that required dedication, observation, and reflection. Each day offered new opportunities to nurture life, protect the land, and care for family, and each choice reinforced the deeper connection between them all. The sun rose slowly over the Matthews Ranch, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. A gentle breeze swept across the fields, carrying the smell of fresh grass and the faint scent of earth. John Matthews stood by the fence, watching the cattle graze peacefully, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a deep sense of calm. The lessons he had learned from Apache, the symbolic child he had nurtured through patience and care, and the growth within his family had all come together in a quiet harmony. Mary emerged from the farmhouse carrying a tray of breakfast, and Emily followed, her eyes bright with curiosity and energy. The family had grown closer through the weeks of reflection, hard work, and understanding. There was a newfound respect among them, not just for each other, but for the land, the animals, and the small miracles of daily life. Every moment, from feeding the cattle to tending the fields, had become a practice of mindfulness and care. Apache appeared quietly, as he always had, standing near the edge of the pasture. John noticed him immediately, his presence calm but commanding, carrying the same quiet wisdom that had guided them through weeks of change. The stranger's eyes met John's, and without a word, a silent understanding passed between them. Apache had come into their lives for a purpose, and now that purpose had been fulfilled, not through commands or demands, but through the family's willingness to learn, observe, and grow. The morning passed in the usual work of the ranch, yet every action held meaning. John repaired fences with careful attention, making sure every post was secure and every knot tied with precision. Emily helped feed the animals, noticing small details about their behavior and health, while Mary tended to the farmhouse, preparing meals and keeping everything in order. Apache moved among them quietly, sometimes guiding, sometimes observing, but always allowing the family to lead in their own way. As the day drew on, John felt a deep sense of reflection. He thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from the first appearance of Apache on the ranch to the whispered words that had sparked fear, confusion, and eventually understanding. The phrase, "Give me a child now," no longer carried terror. It had become a guiding principle. John realized that the child was present in every act of care, every thoughtful choice, and every moment of awareness that nurtured life and strengthened connections. In the afternoon, John took a walk alone through the pasture, thinking about the lessons learned. He watched a calf nurse quietly, feeling a sense of accomplishment and peace. The animals moved calmly around him, their presence a reflection of the balance and care that had been cultivated over the past weeks. The land itself seemed more vibrant, as if acknowledging the family's growth and respect. Every tree, every blade of grass, and every ripple in the water told a story of patience, observation, and understanding. Emily ran to him suddenly, holding a small bundle of wildflowers she had picked near the edge of the pasture. "Look, Dad," she said, her eyes shining. "These grew by themselves, but I took care to pick them gently so they wouldn't break. Just like you said, we have to care for everything around us." John smiled, realizing that the lessons Apache had brought were now being passed naturally to the next generation. The symbolic child had grown within Emily's understanding, showing that life, care, and responsibility were continuous and shared. As evening approached, the family gathered near the farmhouse, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Apache joined them quietly, observing their interactions without interrupting. The warmth and closeness within the family were palpable. They spoke softly about the day, about the animals, and about the land, each conversation carrying meaning and reflection. John realized that the ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a sanctuary of learning, growth, and connection. Later, as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Apache spoke again. His voice was calm, gentle, yet carried the weight of wisdom. "You have given the child now," he said. "Through your actions, your care, and your awareness, you have nurtured hope, responsibility, and balance. Life is not always easy, but when it is met with respect and understanding, it flourishes." John nodded, understanding fully for the first time the depth of Apache's words. It was not about fear, command, or obedience. It was about awareness, action, and the courage to do what is right. The family sat together quietly, listening to the night sounds, the soft rustling of leaves, the distant calls of animals, and the whisper of the wind. Each sound carried a lesson, a reminder of the interconnectedness of life. John thought about the challenges they had faced, the storm, the illness of the cow, the difficult choices about the herd, and realized that every obstacle had been an opportunity to give the child, to nurture life and understanding. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch continued to thrive. The family's bond had strengthened, and their connection to the land deepened. John found joy in the smallest details: the health of the animals, the growth of the crops, the laughter of Emily, and the quiet support of Mary. Apache's presence became less frequent, as if his purpose had been fulfilled. When he appeared, it was always at moments of significance, offering guidance or observation, but never interference. The lessons had been learned, and the family had embraced the responsibility with heart and action. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Apache quietly prepared to leave. John, Mary, and Emily gathered to say goodbye, feeling a mixture of gratitude, sadness, and understanding. Apache had changed their lives in ways that were difficult to put into words. He had arrived as a stranger, mysterious and commanding, and now departed as a teacher whose wisdom had been woven into every action, thought, and decision of their lives. John shook Apache's hand firmly, his eyes reflecting the depth of his gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Apache nodded, a faint smile on his lips, and with a quiet step he walked toward the distant hills, eventually disappearing from sight. The wind carried a whisper of his presence, a reminder that the lessons remained, even in his absence. In the days that followed, life on the ranch continued, but the family carried the lessons with them. John observed the land with care, mindful of every detail. Emily approached life with curiosity and patience, understanding the importance of observation and gentle action. Mary supported them all, her awareness of life's delicate balance deepened. Together, they had learned that the symbolic child was not a single act, but a living practice, a continuous effort to nurture life, respect the world, and act with awareness. The ranch thrived, not only because of hard work but because of the care, patience, and understanding that the family now applied to everything they did. The animals were healthier, the land more vibrant, and the family more connected than ever before. John realized that life's true rewards were not in wealth, success, or material gain, but in the small, thoughtful actions that nurtured life, hope, and understanding. Years later, when John told the story to Emily, now grown, he spoke not only of Apache but of the lessons that had transformed their lives. He described the symbolic child, the meaning behind the mysterious words, and the importance of patience, care, and awareness in everything they did. Emily listened intently, understanding fully the depth of the lessons that had shaped her family and their home. The ranch, once ordinary, had become a place of growth, reflection, and wisdom, carrying the legacy of the lessons they had learned. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, John often stood by the fence, watching the land and the animals, feeling a quiet gratitude. He thought of Apache and the journey that had begun with fear and mystery and ended in understanding and growth. The symbolic child remained alive in every action, thought, and choice, a living reminder that life, when met with care, patience, and awareness, could flourish in ways beyond imagination. The story concluded not with dramatic events or sudden revelations, but with quiet reflection, understanding, and a deep sense of connection. Life on the ranch continued, enriched by the lessons learned and the growth achieved. The family had discovered that the greatest wisdom often comes through observation, patience, and action guided by care. They had given the child, nurtured it, and allowed it to thrive, not as a single event but as a continuous practice that shaped every day of their lives.